So, as promised, here's my anime/manga recommendation for all Witcher fans. Claymore! I watched and read Claymore actually before I got into the Witcher series, and that might be the reason why The Witcher didn't quite meet my expectations. So without further ado, let me show you why I love Claymore so much. The world the story takes place in is an island that's divided into 47 regions, and each region has a Claymore assigned to them. Claymore are female warriors named after the huge swords they carry. With those swords they fight monsters called Yoma. The Yoma can disguise themselves as humans, but the Claymore are half human, half Yoma, and are therefore the only ones who are able to sense a Yoma's presence, which is why they get hired by towns that have a Yoma problem. The so-called organization, it's really just called the organization, is run by men in black. These men give the Claymores their assignments and collect the payment once the warriors have slain Yoma in the towns that hired them. The organization keeps the Claymore in check and assigns ranks to them from 1 to 47, depending on their strength. Among those, the single digits are exceptionally strong. The world building is more on the simple side, but I think its level of complexity works well with the story Claymore wanted to tell. Also, the author did it intentionally so it wouldn't restrict him. He prioritized the stories of the individual warriors over world and setting. And that he didn't restrict himself was probably a good call, since he first intended to end this manga after 5 volumes, but that didn't really work out. It's 27 volumes now. The main protagonist is a Claymore called Clare. On one of her jobs, Clare saves a young boy named Rocky. From there on, Rocky follows Clare as she travels from town to town slaying Yoma. However, Yoma are not the only thing Clare and Rocky will have to face. They'll meet more companions, learn more about the organization, and there is also Clare's past that still haunts her. I know this is all really vague, but I really enjoyed the way the conflict was introduced without knowing what was coming, and I don't want to rob you of that. So you just have to believe me when I say that the conflict will become far more complex than Clare versus the Yoma of the week. Okay, so from the setup you might already see why I would recommend Claymore to fans of The Witcher, but here are all the similarities. First, there is the appearance. Both Clare and Geralt have bright hair. Under normal circumstances, a Claymore's eyes are silver, but they turn amber when they use their Yoma powers to fight. In The Witcher, orphaned boys are at a very young age turned into Witchers by exposure to certain substances and gruesome training. In Claymore, young orphaned girls are turned into half Yoma, half human warriors and undergo harsh training until they can fight monsters. Which brings us to the next point, the line of work. Both Clare and Geralt move from town to town slaying monsters/Yoma. And both Witcher and Claymore are viewed with suspicion by the very people they save. Why people dislike The Witcher I didn't really get, to be honest. But for the Claymore the reason felt a bit more plausible. I mean, after all, they are part Yoma themselves. And since Yoma tend to eat people, yeah, I can see why someone might be a little afraid. And it's also possible for a Claymore to awaken, which means that the Yoma inside them takes over. Still, both Geralt and Clare end up with a young human companion they swore to protect. Ciri in Geralt's case and Rocky in Clare's case. So, considering all those similarities, who ripped off who? Well, that should be easy to answer. Who published first? The Witcher books by Sapkowski were released in Polish in the 90s. However, they did not get translated into English until 2007, the same year the first Witcher game came out. The Claymore Manga was first published in 2001. So unless Yagi Norihiro, who created Claymore, speaks Polish and kept track of the Polish fantasy book market, I don't think he knew about the Witcher Geralt when he wrote Claymore. So yeah, I think neither is a ripoff, but more like convergent evolution, which is actually a biological term that describes the independent evolution of similar features in different species. Or in this context, the independent evolution of similar stories by different authors. There are also enough differences between The Witcher and Claymore, especially when it comes to the plot, so each of them makes for a unique experience. The art in the manga is really great. You can see a lot of progress in the art style from beginning to end. Especially when it comes to the proportions of the female warriors. And the fight scenes were great. I even enjoyed them more in the manga than in the anime, which is really rare for me. The action scenes in the manga are really clear and easy to follow, and the designs of the awakened beings are awesome, especially in the later volumes. And I don't think I have ever seen a manga/anime with more different hairstyles than this one. The Claymores all wear the same uniform, so the hairstyle is their way of showing some individuality. Aside from different hairstyles, there's also a lot of boobs. I know this is gonna sound like a contradictory statement, but even though there is a lot of nudity, it never felt like fan service. Probably because it didn't do stuff like panty shots and because none of the female cast had boobs that would break the back of a regular person. Here it's more like, well, this is a naked body, so what? But considering this, I was actually quite surprised that Claymore is a shonen manga. which are aimed at a largely male audience between 12 and 18 years old. Because of the amount of nudity and gore, I was totally convinced this was a seinen manga, which are aimed at a largely male audience between 18 and 45 years old. Not because I think it's inappropriate for a younger audience, but just comparing it to stuff like Naruto, I didn't expect it to be shonen. One of the best things about Claymore are the detailed character backstories for some of the Claymore warriors. They're just really impactful and often used for show don't tell in a great way. The Claymore are not the only ones with interesting backstories. Many of the antagonists are well established and really interesting. There is a big variety of antagonistic forces, which is good, because otherwise the fighting could get boring at some point. The main character Claire grows more powerful throughout the course of the story, but her opponents also get more and more dangerous. The uncertainty if and how she and her companions will make it out alive kept me at the edge of my seat the entire time I was reading the manga. Another positive thing is the way death is handled. The Claymore are hard to kill, but once they are dead, death is permanent. I can't stress enough how important that is. I don't always have a problem with the resurrection trope. It can be done well, but in many cases it isn't. So I was just really glad Claymore didn't fall into that trap. And last but not least, the ending of the manga was done masterfully. Honestly, this ending is one of the best conclusions to a story I've ever read. All the important plot threads were finished in a satisfying way. And the way the main conflict is resolved at the end rounds up Claire's backstory and the plot so well. I love it. I don't know, I feel like sticking the landing is where a lot of authors fail. Far too often they drag it out way too long or it's rushed as hell. And let me tell you, neither of those leads to a satisfying climax. But nothing is perfect, not even Claymore. There are a few things that could have been improved upon. One of those is Rocky. After getting saved by Claire, he imprints on her and starts following her around like a little baby chick. And he's about as useful. In the anime he is the worst. In the manga he's kind of annoying at the beginning too, but it wasn't as bad as it was in the anime. And in the manga Rocky actually shows a solid character development towards the end. Nothing stellar, but I think more was not possible given how things started out with Rocky. He even disappears for a large chunk of the story. I don't know, felt like even Yagi himself was not too fond of his character. Still, I think it's good that Rocky was in the story, because his role does have an important purpose. But I don't think it would have been impossible to make him less irritating. The worst thing about Claymore was the ending of the anime though. The manga wasn't finished at this point, and that's why they made a different ending. An ending that was rushed as hell, and it felt like there should have been a second season. But the way things ended in the anime would have required more changes from the manga in a second season. Because the way things ended in the anime rendered some things that happened later on in the manga impossible. So that might be one reason why we never got a second season. I really hope they'll give Claymore the Brotherhood treatment and do a remake now that they know the ending we got from the manga. Who knows, maybe they'll even find a way to make Rocky less annoying. So it's definitely worth the shot. Alright, so what is my overall opinion on Claymore? Except for some minor things, the plot was great and therefore deserves a 5 out of 5. Aside from Rocky, most other characters were really interesting and used well in the story. If Yagi would have wanted, he could have dug a little deeper here and there, but overall I really liked the majority of the characters a lot. So they get a 4 out of 5. As I said before, the world building works well in the story Claymore wanted to tell. But because of its simplicity, I'll give it only a 3.5 out of 5. The art for both the manga and the anime is great. It's done in a style that served the genre well, I think. But knowing what else is out there when it comes to attention to detail, it's not quite a 5 out of 5. But it's a very pleasing 4 out of 5. I also like the anime soundtrack by Takumi Masanori, especially since I listen to a lot of metal, and some of the soundtracks certainly took inspiration from there. And I don't know, metal and a medieval setting just go well together. So the soundtrack gets a 4.5 out of 5. The anime was fun to watch except for its ending, and I absolutely love the manga. So Claymore gets a well-deserved 5 out of 5 for overall enjoyment from me. So if this review convinced you to read or at least watch Claymore, I'm happy. And if you're already familiar with Claymore, do you agree that it's a good experience for Witcher fans? For me it was the other way around actually, that Witcher was a great experience as a Claymore fan. But I think it should work in both directions. If you enjoyed this review, please leave a like. Thanks for watching and I hope to see you in future videos. Anyway, farewell.